We are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On tonight's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Mark Greathouse. He just published a new book in his series of books. The title of this book is Nueces Blood, and Texans Prepare for War. But it is one in a 4-book series of historical fiction. The earlier books were published fairly recently. One is, the most recent is Nueces Deceit, The Strip Gives Up Its Evil. The next is Nueces Reprise, The Tumbleweed Sagas. And then the first one is Nueces Justice. And they all have really good reviews on Amazon. He's also written a book of history titled Nicholas Dunn, The Making of a Texas Legend. So you'll see this Texas theme here. But he can talk more about the book. And so author Mark Greathouse, are you there?
I sure am. Thanks, Will.
Awesome. Well, thanks for agreeing to the interview. For people who may not have heard of your background, can you talk about your Texas background and what led you to write these books of historical fiction, all of them with the title Nueces?
Absolutely. And trust me, some of the downstream novels won't necessarily include Nueces in the title. Okay. But that being said, no, my daddy was born in a little place west of Corpus Christi called Alice, Texas. It was named after the famed rancher Richard King's daughter. It was a railroad hub. And still have a ton of family down there. But my dad was born there, and that's how I claim my Texas heritage, actually, because while I visited there a ton of times, I have actually just planning to actually purchase property down there in the very near future, my wife and I. So at any rate, I'm a 5th-generation Texan. We got an ancestry that just grabbed my heart. Once I got done with a long business career, I got involved in a lot of business organizations. I was what they call an angel investor, doing private equity investment. I did some entrepreneurship, worked the corporate career ladder for a couple dozen years. And finally, when I retired, I went back to my true love, which was writing. I've always written, done poetry. In fact, my first job out of college was writing tech manuals for Polaris ballistic missile submarines.
Interesting.
So it really, this whole love of the West and the Western frontier kind of hit me when I was digging through some old papers that my dad had left after he passed back in about 95. And there was a biography left behind by one of my cousins, it turns out. And it told the story of the family in Texas. And it really grabbed me because it was just chock full of information about this whole image of the Western frontier. It's kind of like a final bastion of freedom. And in fact, I have a cousin. His name was Patrick Dunn. He passed away about 50 years ago now. But he owned North Padre Island, which is just east of Corpus Christi, Texas. He raised cattle across 75 miles of that island. And when he sold it, he said, there went his freedom. The idea of having land and cattle, it was about the individual character of the frontier and the people that pursued it. So it grabbed me, William. It grabbed me deeply. The characters that I'm able to draw from my actual family that grace the pages of the fiction are like the heroes and the protectors, knights errant, if you will. And you combine that with my own Texas ancestral heritage. It's these essences of freedom coupled with tenacity and ruggedness, rugged individualism, bravery of the settlers of the West. It intrigued me enough to really lead me to immerse myself in writing Westerns. I mean,
gotcha. And so this takes place in that area, right? North Padre Island, very close to the Mexican border,
yeah.
Corpus Christi.
Yeah, it's called the Nueces Strip. It goes from Laredo all the way to Corpus Christi, Laredo on the Rio Grande, north to a place called Uvalde, and then south to Brownsville. So it was at one time even called the Wild Horse Desert. But it's named the Nueces Strip because the northern border is on the Nueces River, Nueces Bay. Nueces, of course, being the Spanish word for nuts, owing to the pecan trees that were prolific.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's kind of famous for that. Isn't that area still
Oh
famous?
yeah.
And your books are set at a certain time frame, correct?
Yeah. The first six, there's actually going to be 7 in the series. They've all been written. It's just release dates now. This a 5th one's coming out in September. The first 6 books occur in a time window that starts at 1856 and goes to 1865, the end of the war between the states. By the way, in Texas, they don't call it the Civil War.
Right.
And then the final book in the series skips 20 years and brings the legend of the protagonist, a Texas Ranger named Luke Dunn, to a close. And notably, Dunn is the family, my ancestral family name, goes back to 5 brothers who immigrated from Ireland between 1845 and 1867. And one of them, Nicholas Dunn, came as a 15-year-old. He's the one that the biography is based upon. He arrived in 1850 as a 15-year-old young man, built a life. He drove cattle. He became noted as a Comanche fighter. He had a ranch that was in excess of 15,000 acres, raised longhorns, speculated, married the love of his life, had 9 kids. He was heart and soul of that whole Corpus Christi, Alice region. He was larger than life in many respects.
It's kind of like the classic immigrant makes good story, comes off the ship and adapts. I mean, in that area too, it was after the Alamo was 1836, so you're just kind of seeing the Mexican-American War finish, and the Indian Wars are still taking place, correct? Those happened.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, the protagonist, his history is he arrives in America in about 1854. He rides with a Texas Ranger named James Callahan, who's trying to clean the Apache out of South Texas. Gets into all kinds of trouble. But that ultimately leads Dunn to become a Texas Ranger. And his mission then is, and keep in mind, he came out of Ireland in a situation where the British were very oppressive. The potato famine was going on.
It was a created famine.
Oh my goodness, was it ever? And the cash crops were sent to England, and the potatoes were left to rot. And he escaped that. It was a lot of rebellions going on, and his father said, "You're gonna go." And so in fact, this kind of pervades most of the message I try to get through in my writing. And I heard a television personality use these words, and I went, "Wow, did he ever nail it?" The West, Texas in particular, was settled by what I call second chancers. Think about it. If you got all these people who, they made a living, they squeaked out a life in the East or another nation. They came west with all this terrific opportunity. Didn't matter whether it was ranching or farming or coal mine, gold digging, or whatever it might be. It was second chancing. And these are people that had a purpose. Yeah, sometimes they went astray of the law. That's where Texas Rangers and what have you come in. But it really became important. And I try to filter in secondary characters in my books. Luke Dunn runs through the whole series, but he's got a wife that's the prototypical frontier woman. She's courage and toughness and resourcefulness and the independence that's so necessary to thrive. She's not above shooting a Comanche or a bandit. And of course, they lived through the Civil War and the foragers and all the stuff that goes on around where they're living there near Corpus. I've got a Comanche chief, a guy named Three Toes, kind of a cool name. He's inadvertently captured by the protagonist, by Luke Dunn, and they develop a friendship. And Three Toes senses what's going to happen as to his people. And so he's trying to learn from Dunn. And that whole story of how he gets on and begins to recognize the destiny of his people and understand what the white man's going to do becomes an important part of the story. And then there's a redemptive aspect. I've got a woman named Scarlet Rose. She's also referred to as the Laredo Whore. She runs afoul of some bad influences and escapes. And our hero on the redemptive side sees promise and helps her escape from her profession, if you will. And over the course of the books, she's redeemed and becomes successful. She gets married and a family and what have you. So, and importantly, I feel that what's a key thing to be delivering through this, and I think we see it in a lot of literature, but I like to think Western genre really captures it, William, is an underlying intellectual honesty. Punches aren't pulled. I mean, the language of the era was what it was. And you got to put it in perspective too. I mean, I think when you place yourself in those environments, just going from San Antonio, say, to Corpus Christi, today it's a 2-hour drive. Zoom, you're 75, 80 miles an hour on the interstate.
Right.
Back then, man, you're on a wagon, man. You're lucky to do 25 miles a day.
Right. And a very hot temperature, very difficult,
yeah.
hard scrabble environment back then,
Oh,
for
yeah.
sure. That frontier was a real frontier.
Yeah. So I find it in my heart of hearts and my purpose for really attaching and immersing myself in the Western genre is I've got a part of me that's always sided with education. My wife and I homeschooled our boys. We're very fortunate. They went to college, both graduated from college, did real well. One's a software engineer, the other's a logistics guy for a trucking company. They're doing, so proud of them, Eagle Scouts, the whole 9 yards, athletes, what have you. I've spent about 8 years teaching business courses at a local college, and I saw the products coming out of schools, and it was deep concern, just a deep concern. And so I felt, and I served on a local school board. That was really eye-opening. If people really want to get out there and do something, get involved locally, because that's where it's happening. All kinds of stuff can happen in Washington, D.C. in these highfalutin places. But let me tell you, where the rubber meets the road, local government, local schools, that kind of thing. I recently attended, I'm a member of the Western Writers of America, and I recently attended their convention in Loveland, Colorado. It was probably one of the best conventions I've ever been to in terms of meeting people and learning about my craft and things that are going on in the industry. And it's a real concern. Censorship is huge. The Homestead Foundation, they have a Homestead Foundation in the Western Writers of America. It's a wonderful organization. They're putting together videos and curricula for elementary schools right now, focusing on schools west of the Mississippi, but ultimately basically teaching history in a way that excites and motivates and grabs younger, elementary age kids. And then they're very concerned with censorship. You've got with these big publishers in New York, you have what you call sensitivity readers, making sure that authors don't, say the wrong thing and all that kind of stuff. So I've been active with them. I write monthly op-eds for a local newspaper on all sorts of topics, national debt, inflation, the public education problems, cancel culture, you name it. And then, one of the things I dare not fail to mention today is that my publisher, Defiance Press and Publishing, is holding this Thursday night in the Woodland Woodlands Marriott Waterway Hotel north of Houston, a rally against censorship. They're bringing in Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio as a featured guest, and all the stable of Defiance Press authors are going to be there. Starts at 7:00 on Thursday evening.
Is Defiance located in Texas?
Yes, they're in Conroe.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah,
Makes sense.
About 40 minutes north of Houston, actually.
Gotcha. Well, it's an important subject. I mean, I think I've felt it myself. I just walked away from Facebook and Twitter. I don't even want to be canceled. I don't even want to be conditioned. I'm just done with that. I don't know how other people can put up with that.
Facebook, can you be canceled?
What's that?
If you're not on Facebook, can you be canceled?
No, not by them. I mean, I could probably be canceled somewhere else, but at least I won't get canceled by Zuckerberg.
When you think of the weapons they have, doxing and narking and all these terms they have now, I refer to it as the cult of wokeness.
Yes, it's a religion. It's like a postmodern religion.
It seems to be. But going back to the books, probably the impetus, as I mentioned earlier on, was a cousin who wrote a little biopic of the family, about 35 pages, registered with the Texas Historical Society and all that sort of stuff. But he was a railroad man at heart. He started out 18 years old as an entrepreneur. He was a teamster, hauling rails and ties for building railroads in Texas. Him and his brother. That played out, and he went and was a supervisor building the Panama Canal.
Oh, fascinating.
And he was one tough guy, man. I mean, the stories he writes about his experience on the canal. Well, I'm finishing up another biography that is about him. But he went on to work the Nickel Plate Railroad up in Terre Haute, Indiana, and then returned to Texas, became an oil man. Wow. So the family, though, is full of those kind of stuff. I had a cousin, Red John Dunn, who spent part of his life as about 10 years as a Texas Ranger, got acquitted twice for murder because it was part of his Texas Ranger duties, and then became a dairy farmer. He was a vigilante for quite a while. All the rough life and conditions that went on at the time. And it's interesting. He wrote an autobiography that was edited by his daughter, whose pen name was Lilith Lorraine. Her actual name was Mary Maud Dunn. By the way, she married a cowboy named Cleveland Wright, so her married name was Mary Maud Dunn Wright. But let's leave that alone. Right. But she was a famed, wrote science fiction novels, and was a famed poetess and a suffragette who was on J. Edgar Hoover's watch list. Wow. And she, in writing the preface to Red John's book, challenged readers to think, well, this is the 1930s. If you lived back in the 1800s, would you have comported yourself as well? How would you have responded? And I challenged my readers the same way. This was real life. I mean, we're not talking tulips and buttercups here.
Right. Super hard Scrabble.
Oh my
and
goodness.
Conflict all over the place, and independent from the other states in the Union. Just all kinds of things happened. The Civil War. I mean, what was the Civil War like for Texas at that time? If you cover that.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind at the time, about 30% of the Texas population was slaves, roughly 180,000. Pretty sizable. They were fearful, like many southern states were, of revolt. You had pockets of resistance to slavery. The German immigrants in particular, who were also very much against secession. But in the part of Texas I write about, the southern part, there wasn't a lot of call for slavery. I have to admit that my great-great-great-grandfather, Nick Dunn's father, actually raised cotton, and he had some slaves. Nothing to be proud of, certainly. And I think it's kind of interesting that it really wasn't the most economically feasible way to operate a farm. But at any rate, Texas, I mean, I had one cousin, his name was Michael. He went out to be a translator for a patrol of Confederate troops who were chasing after some cattle rustlers. And he went out under a flag of truce, tried to negotiate with the bandits, the rustlers. turned to go back to join the troops, they shot him in the back on his way back. There's a guy 25 years old. It was what they faced. But overall, I mean, Corpus Christi, you had a Union schooner sitting out in Corpus in the Gulf, every once in a while lobbing cannonballs into Corpus Christi. Most of the time they give warning, but that's what they faced. You had foragers from the Union side and the Confederate side passing through at different times, and you just did your best. But I think overall, I mean, another interesting thing was my great grandfather John Dunn. He actually ran caravans of cotton down the Texas coast through Brownsville and down to Matamoros to send out to get around the Yankee blockade.
Right, because even though the whole Gulf of Mexico was blockaded, correct?
Oh my goodness, yeah. So it was white gold, they called it, the cotton, but it was part of the economy. I mean, basically, and most anyone would tell you, I've been doing a lot of study now on Sam Houston, and they recognized early on that the South simply did not have what it was going to take to win any kind of conflict. If it wasn't for probably the stupidity of a lot of the generalship in that war, it probably wouldn't have lasted as long, and maybe 600,000 lives.
It's very true.
So
the unions were incompetent until they got Grant, I think. Then he split the Mississippi in half.
Yeah. Yeah, then you had Sheridan and Sherman with their burn and pillage strategy.
Right. No, it's true. But yeah, it's really fascinating how that one part of the current Union was so independent, and the people's character was very different. I would say Texans really are unique especially at that time, and they have such a unique state history in that, in a very difficult, it's not like California, like the California settlers. They faced challenges, and the Comanches and the Apaches were super violent, right?
Oh my goodness. Well, the word Comanche actually translates to enemy.
Oh, wow. And
it was said that if you were going to get captured by Comanche, you saved the last bullet.
Right.
But an example, going back to Sam Houston. I mean, here's a guy who he winds up his family moves to Tennessee. He ultimately gets into politics from Tennessee. He runs into some hiccups, winds up going to Oklahoma. He marries a Cherokee woman. Couple years, they actually establish a trading post. Ultimately, and he actually takes up. He's born a Presbyterian. He takes up the Indian ways, and then he decides he's going to go to Texas. And at the time, to go into Texas, you had to convert to Catholicism.
Oh, interesting.
Part of the requirement. That was a deal that Stephen Austin had worked out. So Houston comes to Texas, converts to Catholicism. Eventually, by 1850, he remarries, and ultimately he has half dozen kids, by the way, and gets baptized as a Baptist.
So he's very flexible. He has flexible sensibilities.
Working.
Right. I mean, wasn't one of his scandals like his marriage was to a 14 or 15-year-old girl, and he was like in his 40s or something? I forgot.
Oh yeah.
But he was a smart guy. Didn't he speak different languages? I think he knew Greek, and
he was pretty sharp, dude.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I admire him. Yeah, actually, I'm working on an alternate history for him right now.
But, I mean, it's incredible. And there's the huge one, the second largest city in the country is named after this guy who was really kind of a frontiersman.
Oh, he was through and through. I mean, he stood 6'2". He's a big man. Carried a couple bullets in him. As time went on, you recall when Santa Anna surrendered at San Jacinto, Houston was basically lying under a tree, had been shot, and had a bullet in the leg, and he still had the coolness to deal with Santa Ana when they brought the dude in.
Right.
So, but
what was that? 1940? When was the Mexican American War? Was 49?
1836 was San Jacinto. Texas independence, March 2nd. And then you had that 9-year hiatus before statehood in 1845. 46 was the Mexican-American War, Zachary Taylor and all that. And a lot of people came out of that. There were some awesomely famous Texas Rangers and what have you that guys like Jack Coffee Hayes and Ben McCulloch and Rip Ford and guys like that helped bring peace to Texas. Keep in mind, Texas was economically a disaster. This was long before the oil boom. It was cotton was probably the biggest economic resource of all. And then actually Texas Rangers often were paid in land. Homesteading was big. There was plenty of land, and there were gazillions of longhorns and horses and buffalo running wild. They had a line that ran the 98th meridian that runs from Dallas through Austin and San Antonio. To the west of that was called the Comancheria, and that was rough country. You know, it took a special kind of constitution to do that.
Cross that line, that meridian.
Oh my goodness! So ultimately, though, we go back and we've got action and grit and passion that's worn in. I have to admit, I mean, the very first bad guy gets killed in that first book, Nueces Justice, doesn't get shot. He's got a gun drawn down on him, but what gets him is a rattlesnake. Right. You know, a little different, and a lot of so much of the mayhem that went on was murder from ambush. I have to admit that there's probably a little bit of sex, enough to make a church lady blush, maybe a little bit, but not overdone, because that was also part of it. You know, you go to McMurtry's Lonesome Dove, and good Lord, you can't even leave that topic alone.
Right. I mean, weren't there a lot of like ladies? I guess whorehouses is one way to term it.
Yes, there were.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, it's sad.
I mean, what's the best little blank in Texas? Well, I think that has a legacy of all the way back there, yeah. Or on the west, really.
Yeah. I mean, my wife and I went up to Rapid City, South Dakota earlier this year. We were looking at dead fish and deadwood and spearfish and Custer State Park and all around those environs. And you really get an appreciation for, even today, for what was and the harsh conditions, living in effectively mud huts a lot of times in homesteading.
And so you have your family background that influenced and inspired this historical fiction. Did you read? I mean, is it also just kind of the history that you picked up being from that area?
Well, I have to admit, in college, as a history minor, I've always loved history. Doing my family tree, so far I've tracked it down to 2,300 names across 10 generations out of the 5 brothers that immigrated from Ireland to Texas. So I got a lot of family down there. There's probably 4 dozen that I
communicate with.
Yeah. And we get together whenever I go down. I'm going down again at the end of this week for the Defiance Press rally, but then I'm extending to go down to Corpus Christi and visit family. So it's in your blood. And I should say that Texas, I would never characterize as a melting pot. Texas had distinct
ethnic groups, segregation.
Not segregation so much. I mean, it was sad. I mean, Mexicans, by and large, were often treated worse than slaves.
No, I didn't know that.
They're less, just not. There was a lot of prejudice, no question, it was unfortunate. By the same token, you had a lot of. I mean, I remember as a teenager visiting an uncle's ranch down in Texas, and I was so impressed with the vaqueros, the cowboys. My goodness, they knew their stuff. and some of the best cowboys out there. And even today, I mean, I go to rodeos when I can, and boy, there's some bull riders and bronc busters out there, some black fellows, Mexican, and, Hispanic guys. Awesome. I mean, so I think there was an intolerance of, in some respects, but at the same time, could be a mutual respect. And it was a circumstantial thing as much as anything.
I mean, it still has a history. I mean, Juneteenth, I think, is from the hearing of the freeing of the slaves in Texas, right?
Well, actually, it was Union troops came to Galveston and announced that, hey, didn't you guys know a couple years back they had the Emancipation Proclamation? That's what it came from. Gotcha. So it technically the slaves had already been freed. They just didn't know it yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's fascinating history. I mean, it's really an amazing time in American history and Texas history, really, too, because that was taking over conquering some very tough terrain and people, hard scrabble people, definitely.
Oh, yeah. And the varmints. I mean, you didn't know when you were going to hit, bear, mountain lion, rattlesnakes. I was, taking a tour of the King Ranch, which, as many folks know, is bigger than the state of Rhode Island. To this day. I mean, they turn out 50,000 head of cattle to the markets each year and about 250 head of quarter horses. But everywhere around, there's little signs posted. Watch out for rattlesnakes.
Right.
And that's Texas. And these days, I know I've got a lot of my family down there. They're, with what's going on, they're carrying heat.
Right.
Can't help it.
Yeah, no, it's Texas. I've been to Texas. I know the attitude still pervades to this day that came from the 19th century. There's definitely the sensibility, the way they drive, act.
They drive friendly, don't they?
What's that?
They drive friendly.
They're very friendly, but there's a code of honor. There's definitely a Texas code of honor.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't upset that.
Well, back when the masks were so prevalent, I actually got a hold of a mask that was emblazoned with "Don't mess with Texas."
Yeah, no, it's the truth.
Pretty much. Of course, that was designed for picking up litter on the highways, but don't mess Texas. So whatever.
Right. Well, I mean, even the driving in Texas, the attitude is like, this curb is impeding my movement over to that road, so I'll just go over the curb, drive my truck over that. You don't see that in other states.
The left lane is for passing only. If you're hanging in that left lane, you're going to get pulled over.
Yeah, well, that's the way you're supposed to drive all over the country. It doesn't.
Well, yeah, but that's a whole nother area.
I know. Let's get back to the books. So, where's the best place to pick up these books? So, you have a 7-part series.
That's
4 are out now.
Right. The first 4 are out. The 5th one comes out in October, and that'll be Nueces Grit. And they're available from online, in print, e-audio, and ebook from Amazon, Barnes & Noble, most popular booksellers. You can go directly to the publisher at defiancepress.com. And if people can catch me on the move around the country, they call me, my nickname down there is Tumbleweed. Gotcha. My good cousin Jim gave me that one. He said, every time you come down, you just bounce from place to place like a tumbleweed. Hey, that's catchy. All right.
Stuck, yeah. And so the first one is Nueces Justice, right? So that would be for people to start the saga, 4 parts of it. Yeah, you probably can learn a lot of history through just reading that. I mean, we talked in the pre-show about how these other books are important.
They are. It's a core that goes through the times. I make a lot of references to historical events. There's things that go on down there that are so interesting. They're almost too unbelievable to be made into a movie or anything like that. There's a thing occurred in 1875 called the Good Friday Raid. And basically some Mexican bandits kidnapped a bunch of people and stole very expensive saddles and killed a few people. And they actually kidnapped some members of some of my ancestors and a whole bunch of my family. They put together a posse.
Wow.
And they went after him. So
that stuff really did happen. I mean,
right. They rescued him.
Movies.
Right.
And then you also have the nonfiction book too. So if people are interested,
Nicholas Dunn, yeah.
And then you have another nonfiction coming out, so people can kind of keep an eye on
biographies.
And then, sorry, please
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, where's the best place for people to reach out to you if you have social media or email?
All right, yes. You can get on my website at tumbleweed.me. And I've got a gazillion videos if you want to wade through them. They're 4 or 5, 6 minutes a piece, different topics. Mostly, there's always some book promotion going on. I have a Facebook page at Tumbleweed Sagas.
So you've got a Facebook page too. Gotcha. So this is your website. Let's see if I can
I'm afraid. Yeah, there you go. And and I do include some occasional posts that are taken from my videos. One of the things that came out of that convention I mentioned of the Western Writers of America was that censorship is a culture killer.
It is.
When you remove a culture's stories, you remove the history. It's like talking about the philosopher George Santayana, who said, those who fail to understand history are doomed to repeat it. Well, here we go.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of a larger thing. It's not only just censoring it. They're really the modern book burners and really terrible human beings who really are interested in censoring. And they want to replace actual historical fact with fake kind of stuff that they write. So it's really profoundly.
You remember the movie? Remember the movie Fahrenheit 451?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
I remember the book too, Ray Bradbury. Right?
Oh, yeah, Ray Bradbury, right.
And so where's this, to say again, where this against censorship, the Defiance Press is having an anti-censorship
That's
meeting.
at the Woodlands Marriott Waterway Hotel. It's north of Houston. And it's at 7 p.m. on Thursday evening, the 29th. 29th, gotcha. And there's going to be beverages, hors d'oeuvres. You get to meet, you get your picture taken with Sheriff Joe Arpaio. There'll be other authors there. I'm really looking forward to. There's several of Defiance Press authors I haven't met yet, and I'm looking forward to that. And the Defiance Press founder, Dave Roberts, of course, will be there. Great individual. Really love Dave. And it's just. The idea is to point up what we're faced with, and I've gotten involved with the Western Writers. I think our next convention surely will, which will be in June of next year in Great Falls, Montana. Surely is going to have a segment that's going to deal with censorship. That whole idea of I posted sometimes it takes strange forms. We talk about shadow banning and stuff like that, but I posted a review of a book on Amazon and it got rejected because it didn't meet community standards. And I looked at it and I looked at it and I looked at their standards and I couldn't for the life of me figure out what they were talking about. What algorithm kicked that out?
It wouldn't be the first.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the service, what do you mean? I don't know. What are you talking about? Oh,
but it's a form of censorship.
No doubt. No, it's a shame too, because a lot of that stuff will get lost. And
worse yet, our kids are on the receiving end of this in school.
Doubt. Yeah. We're all being conditioned. And that's really the sad part of it is some of the kind of people who may not be more hard-headed would allow this to happen. And it's a trend that's a monstrous trend. It leads to awful things. And history could tell us that. So
first you gotta be willing to look at history.
That's true. Well, here's the thing. Maybe people can learn from the history in your books of tough, independent people who face challenges and overcome them and learn from that and integrate those into today's world.
And then ask themselves, would you be able to overcome? Can you overcome today?
Right. That's a good question. Some people I don't think can. So again, the author's name is Mark Greathouse. The book that he's just putting out is Nueces Blood, but it's a 4-part books that have been put out. You can get the audiobook. There's just going to be a 7-part series. And there's also, if you're interested in nonfiction book, one published and another one to come out soon. So keep an eye out for Mark Greathouse. Thank you so much for your time.
William, thank you so much. Enjoyed it.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Great.
Great talking to you. All right. Don't go anywhere.